and expand their minds. They'll explore France and Brazil and build a volcano and submarine from their kitchen table. LittlePassports.com.
It's 12:06 and time for KUOW's Week in Review.
This is Bill Radke. What happened this week and why does it matter? That is our mission on Week in Review, and I always bring together a panel of super friends. And this week, we're talking about Seattle Times senior investigative reporter Patrick Malone. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
We've got the Strangers staff writer, Jasmyne Keimig. Welcome back, Jasmyne.
What's up, Bill?
I'm good. And Seattle City Council Insight editor and writer, Kevin Schofield. Welcome back. Good to have you.
Hey, Bill. Thanks.
And, you know, you can watch us because we are so watchable, honestly, right now. 4 of us live on Facebook or YouTube. You can search KUOW Public Radio. I decided I'm just going to leave my blinds open and let the leaf blower in, because without it, I truly look gloomy, and we don't need more gloominess right now. Okay, speaking of which, let's get at the news this week. Last night, Washington's governor addressed the state to say COVID infections are in a third wave. Let's see if we can hear that clip. Let's try that again.
Growth, and every single day matters. We cannot wait until our hospitals' halls are lined with gurneys waiting for rooms before we take decisive action.
The weekly average of new COVID cases has doubled in the last 2 weeks. Governor Inslee and his wife Trudi sat side by side on a couch and urged Washingtonians to skip this year's in-person holiday gatherings.
It's not just Thanksgiving, but it's also your birthday parties, your Seahawks celebrations. It doesn't matter what you're doing. These gatherings in your homes are dangerous right now.
Jasmyne, you had to tell your mom you're not coming home.
Yeah, I had. Yeah, it was a really difficult conversation to have, right? After all of this time spent apart, I think Thanksgiving is something where, families can really come together and see one another. But, I had to tell my mom, out of love, for you and for me, I don't think I can come and join the family for Thanksgiving this year. And I think that is a conversation that a lot of Washingtonians, a lot of Americans are having right now to prevent the spread of COVID. And so I was watching Inslee's address last night. I was really surprised to see him not announce any new restrictions. I'm not really sure what the reasoning is to wait another week or, even a few days when, cases in Washington are growing exponentially and people's lives are at risk, and we're heading into the holiday season where people want to see each other after being apart. So I think that's really kind of weighing on everyone's mind right now.
Kevin, the governor today issued a recommendation that people entering our state quarantine for 14 days. But as Jasmyne said, he didn't close businesses, didn't make masks mandatory. Why do you think that is?
Well, this is the same thing we saw with the governor back in the spring when he just started. He starts with the dad talk. And in fact, I thought it was very iconic that he did this with his wife on the couch yesterday, where, he's saying,
now, Washington, your mother and I.
Yeah, it's like, I don't want to take the car keys away, but if you leave me no choice, I'm going to do it. But then what he does is he gradually ratchets up the restrictions, right? He did this in the spring. And actually, I think in a lot of ways it was effective because, it wasn't this, incredible jolting thing for everybody where we go to sort of complete shutdown. He used it over a number of weeks and, it raised people's attention, but it also stopped a sort of an immediate, political pushback super quickly. And I think my guess is he's going to do the same thing here, right? He'll probably start
behavioral psychology there.
He may start with, shutting down indoor dining and bars, because those are known, hotspots, and we'll just kind of see where it goes from there. But, it's been interesting because there's been a lot of data over the last few weeks that's been pointing to kind of these informal, casual family gatherings as a big source of transmission at the moment, right? And restricting those is going to be a tougher thing to do.
I think he's going to have a hard time getting buy-in if he does impose restrictions. And we saw that in the spring. For instance, I took a close look at the construction industry, and some people just told us outright that they defied him with impunity, frankly, because, the Inslee administration gave businesses a long leash And in addition to that, even when they got multiple complaints about a particular builder, for instance, they didn't enforce that. And so there was a lot of ignoring these restrictions. And I just kind of question that unless there's going to be enforcement, whether it truly puts a dent in the spread of the virus the way that he hopes it would.
Why didn't they enforce then? Why, I ask any of you, why do you think that do you think that that'll change, that, okay, we've been doing this long enough that you'll understand when enforcement kicks in? Or do you think they just don't go that route?
I mean, I think it really depends on, what industry you're talking about. I think something like indoor dining, it's much easier to stop people from coming inside of a restaurant, right? And I think people will do as much as the government allows them to do. But I think, with things like the construction industry, it can be a bit more tenuous to enforce those restrictions.
I think Jasmyne's exactly right there. I think it's going to be, an understanding of sort of people's tolerance of this. And, we've learned a lot over this year, right, about, the economic impacts of doing these kinds of restrictions for things like the construction industry, as well as for, restaurants and bars and other businesses, and what causes people to react very strongly and what, not so much.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of COVID fatigue too, right? As much as it is a present danger that hangs over every interaction that we have, really existential. I think people are tired of it, right? I think that we've kind of normalized the fear and the danger of interacting with people and going out and, that kind of viral transmission. So I think that while we're more used to these restrictions, I think it could definitely pose a little bit, it'd be harder to enforce.
Really, I think that the spread of the disease is going to be what ultimately curbs people's behaviors. We saw it with construction in Kirkland. We wrote about a major project there that, got a special dispensation to stay open, keep working. We were presented photographic evidence that they weren't following the social distancing guidelines and safe practices. And ultimately, what shut them down wasn't the governor, but, outbreaks of the disease among the workers.
Patrick, you told me that the COVID situation reminded you of Obama inheriting the 2008 recession on a national level.
Yes, I think that, the early part of the Biden presidency is going to be defined by how he reckons with the mess that he inherited. And it's quite a different mess than the one Obama got. It involves convincing people who are just ideologically against something that science should be adhered to. And so this is a difference that transcends just even differences in economic theory. There are people who see wearing a mask as undermining their identity as, a strident Republican. And so how is he going to reach these populations? I think that it's going to be a big challenge. And Trump has left many challenges for Biden, none more formidable than COVID itself.
Yeah, but I think Patrick's right, and I think one of the biggest challenges for Biden that we're going to see right away is, can he figure out how to depoliticize wearing a mask, right? The science is saying now a mask isn't enough, right? We get a lot of people wearing masks in Washington State, and we've still, we're in a crisis, back in a crisis with us, right? So we have to do more than that. But if he, at the very least, can't depoliticize that and get everybody on board with doing that, we're really going to be in trouble.
Right. And
looking into the Biden's plans as well.
Yeah. And just sort of on like the depoliticizing the mask tip, I think that not having someone in the White House, the highest office in the land, kind of spewing, these falsehoods of connecting masks to like liberals, I think will be really helpful. But, in terms of the COVID task force or the, kind of Avengers that Biden is assembling right now, he's looking into the Defense Production Act to create more PPE, making instant at-home testing more available, doubling, drive-through testing sites. And I think that, that will be a huge help to states in the Midwest that are getting hit really hard right now. But I think can also assist, Washington State that's still continuing to see cases rising. But I also think that him just coming into office and having a plan and sort of demonstrating by leading, I think that will do a lot to sort of help depoliticize masks and COVID safety.
The pandemic is affecting almost everything, including what the city of Seattle can spend money on. And Kevin, this is on your beat, and I know budgets can get wonky. Will you give us the non-wonky overview? What is most important about these budget talks as they're unfolding?
Well, so the two big issues that are really deeply interconnected in this are making reductions in Seattle Police Department, and simultaneously taking at least some of the savings from that, as well as some other sources of money, and plowing them into investments in BIPOC communities in the city to try to create
BIPOC meaning Black, Indigenous,
and people of color. To create some alternatives for creating public safety that don't involve sending out armed police officers to everything, and to address some of the other underlying social causes that have created these kinds of inequities, such as lack of Black communities ownership of property and businesses in their own communities, and having upstream in the criminal justice system kinds of social programs that can keep people from just sort of being in the revolving door of the police system. So, there is two competing views for each of these issues: how to do the investments and what to do with SPD between the mayor's office and the city council. And where it looks like right now is they've actually sort of come to a compromise on these, where the cuts this year or this coming year on SPD are really not that deep. There's about 20%, and it's mostly things that the mayor proposed herself, where different groups, units within SPD are getting kind of moved out of the department into, another civilian kind of parallel organization. But then really, instead of, the mayor's $100 million equitable communities initiative and the city council running kind of a parallel participatory budgeting program, on this one, sort of the city council is really taking the lead and saying, they downsized the mayor's $100 million to $30 million, and they've pushed a lot more of that money over sort of directly into other community programs that have been defunded because of kind of the COVID budget crisis, but then also kind of pumping up the amount of money in the council's participatory budgeting process. And now they're each $30 million. Participatory budgeting is $30 million. The mayor's program is $30 million. And they also say, the mayor's program, you actually don't get to spend any of that money until you sort of tell us how it's in alignment with the participatory budgeting process. So really the council's in the lead for that now.
So changing the way money is spent and not defunding police at the level that some multiple city councilors had pledged. Any reaction from other panelists to either of those developments?
I think that, it's going to keep people in the streets. This is a disappointing budget to the people who are out there protesting, which has been really a defining moment for Seattle this year, for the nation, but in Seattle in particular. I mean, our relevance on the presidential debate stage was about the protests and the reaction here. And, it's helping people to form what their opinions are going to be for a very long time about the way Seattle ought to conduct business. And I think that for the protesters who've been out there every day and for the people who support them, this budget is a non-starter.
Right. And I think that you see a lot of the leading voices in the protests that started this summer kind of reacting to rightly pointing out that 20% isn't 50%. Right. And so you have King County Equity Now and a bunch of other activist organizations calling on the council to continue the hiring freeze of SPD into 2021. And they see that as being a key step in defunding by 50%, moving that money that would go towards salaries, towards pensions, towards public safety measures that specifically protect Black people and Indigenous people rather than cops. So I think that the council would do really well to listen to those voices of people who have been on the ground every single day, talking to their community members, really kind of showing up for Black lives. I think they would do really well to listen to those people.
Kevin, I don't remember which and how many city councilors pledged to defund police by 50%. You can remind me, but why they could have just said when they were asked, they could have said, I don't know, I'm studying the issue. Why did they pledge that and what changed?
Yeah, I think they were in the moment, and it was, if you think back to where we were in June and July, and what was happening on streets every night, I think a lot of them sort of jumped to want to, voice their support for the very strong feelings in the community, and they probably got a little ahead of themselves, right? And Councilmember Wara, as I said a few times through the budget process this fall, we're marching to a plan, not a percentage. And I think for her, what I've heard her talk about, and a couple of the other council members, and where I think most of them have ended up, including some of the leading voice in the council, like Council President Gonzalez and the budget chair Teresa Mosqueda, are saying, this is going to be a multi-year process, and we actually need to spin up a bunch of the replacements for policing before we can really significantly downsize policing. And there's strong arguments on both sides about whether that's really true or not. But I think the most generous thing you can say about what they're doing in the budget now is if you believe that that's true, they are really investing a bunch of money in ways to create these alternative forms of community safety, so that in the 2022 budget, when the participatory budgeting process is done and they've got all that feedback and input, there will hopefully be a number of community-based organizations that are really scaled up and ready to pick up the slack and go.
Any other reaction to that before we roll on? City Council votes, I think, next week on the 2021 budget. Anything?
November 18th.
November
18th. Yeah.
Okay. November 18th. One last thing on the city, and any of you can answer. I wonder how you expect voters to judge the city council and mayor at the polls next year. Or am I getting, there's so much that's so far away that we have just no idea.
Listen, yeah, let's just get to January at this point.
Okay.
It's still March, Bill.
It's still March.
I think there's a couple things. One is COVID is still going to be a big thing. Like
Totally.
They're going to get judged on how well the city does on dealing with COVID, right? And how much help they get from the state and federal government are obviously going to make a big difference in that. But I think the other part will be, do they really get this money out to communities, right? It's easy to allocate a bunch of money. It turns out to be a bunch of process to actually get the money out there. Decide, okay, who's really worthy, who makes the decisions about who gets this money, and then do they really follow through on that?
Plus, there's this phenomenon that I'm noticing here, Bill, that I'm the newcomer among us, only been here since January, but we see things like I-940 and other initiatives that are very well intentioned that just entirely miss their mark, and so I think that we have to see whether these initiatives to get money into the community are really going to have the impact that they hope they will, or whether that needs to be added to in some ways. So right now, everything is very theoretical.
Right now, everything is very theoretical. There's a bumper sticker for our year. Patrick Malone joining us, the Seattle newcomer here, Seattle Times now senior investigative reporter. And you heard Kevin Schofield, editor-writer at SCC Insight. That's Seattle City Council. That's his beat. And at The Stranger, staff writer Jasmyne Keimig joining us. And we're going to continue. We touched a little bit on politics. We're going to get into it more in Washington State's version of politics and a little about the national scene, too, when we return to Week in Review.
It's 12:25 and Week in Review continues just ahead on 94.9 KUOW. Online, listen live at KUOW.org.
Support for KUOW comes from Evergreen Health, whose team of orthopedic specialists are available to help alleviate knee, hip, shoulder, and other joint pain with non-invasive treatments, computer-navigated surgical care, and customized rehabilitation. More on finding a care team at evergreenhealth.com/orthopedic.
Tree Collection explores aging, grief, and insect sex, which has confused some booksellers.
Amazon UK had got this book as #1 under the category of erotic poetry. And I thought, what?
This afternoon on All Things Considered from NPR News.
I'm Kim Malcolm. I'll have local news and analysis from Seattle and around Western Washington, starting at 3 on KUOW 94.9, Seattle's NPR news station.
And right now, Week in Review continues on 94.9 KUOW.
Jasmyne Keimig of The Stranger and Patrick Malone of the Seattle Times, Kevin Schofield of SCC Insight are with me. I can see them because we're live on Facebook and YouTube. You can look at it by searching KUOW Public Radio there. We are now going to talk about some politics. Let us count all the Republicans who hold statewide office in Washington, Oregon, and California. Ready? Kim Wyman, and we're done. That is how blue the West Coast is. Kim Wyman is our Secretary of State, and the only other statewide Republican on our West Coast is on our Northwest Coast in Alaska. Kevin, you say we don't have a two-party system, we have a four-party system.
Yeah, both at the national level and at the state level, and you could argue even in Seattle, I think that's true. There's on the Republican side, there's the Trumpists, and there's whatever's left of moderate Republicans, and then on the blue side, there's moderate Democrats here, and then there's the Progressive Caucus. And both sides are really wrestling with that, as there are some forces that are pulling more people to the extremes. And, I think the moderate sides, groups on both sides there are really kind of struggling what to do. And it'll be interesting to see in the coming months, in the coming years, whether they find common cause with independents who haven't sort of picked a side of red or blue.
I ask all of you, when there's a situation when you have a sort of two-party system and one of the parties is virtually, I won't say irrelevant statewide, but it's such a rump compared to the other, I expect either the parties to realign or I expect a new party to emerge. Do either of you see, is Washington State's situation unstable, or is this just what it is?
I think the Republicans are unstable nationally right now, and I think there's a huge wedge that's forced in between them, and it's been growing ever since the Tea Party started a decade ago. They were welcomed into the tent for, electoral purposes, thinking that this is a way to bolster numbers, and Republicans tolerated sort of their quirkiness, and it's kind of morphed and grown. And what we see with Trump's foot dragging right now, I think is a consequence of that. He's able to raise money. He's got a leadership pack, and he's wanting to sort of impose his will and sort of cement his clout within the Republican Party for years to come. I think it's why we're seeing some, previously more rational Republicans not stepping up and speaking out about the results of this election. They're worried that he's going to primary them. Trump wants to use this money that he's making, it's rolling, it's like a meter running, and every minute that he drags his feet, more money's coming in. And he kind of wants to be a kingmaker within the Republican Party. I think more realistically, he's going to be a maker of royal pains in the neck for Republican candidates, especially incumbents who are centrists that are, running for Congress. So the Trump influence, whether he dies or vanishes into the ether or whatever happens to him in the next few years, the concept of Trumpism isn't going away, and it's going to remain a divide that fires up, a very loyal faction of the Republican voting electorate. And so he's going to have some clout, and it's going to force some reckoning within the Republican Party. Are they going to be able to coexist here? Or is the fact that, somebody has the ability to lord over a third party candidate in presidential elections for time immemorial and siphon off enough votes to affect the outcome? I mean, Trump could be, this populist sort of Ron Paul type or Ross Perot type, who actually does, really mess with Republicans' abilities to win a primary. And then what we saw with the Tea Party 10 years ago was, sure, these extremists were getting elected in primary elections, but they were highly unelectable when it came to a general. So the Republicans really have a mess on their hands with this money that Trump is raising.
Right. And I think it's been really interesting to see, during this election, a lot of Republican secretaries of state sort of become this voice of, competent, moderate Republicanism. Right. And I think that Kim Wyman is sort of the face of that, where, she presided over this mail-in voting system that a lot of far right Republicans demonize as being, the tool of leftists or progressives or that sort of thing. And so, I think with secretaries of state in, Georgia and here, I think that there's a real opportunity for moderate Republicans, whom I haven't seen that much of over the past 4 years, really speak out against Trumpism and the Trump administration. I think that, they could possibly be the face of the more moderate wing of the Republicans, right? Or kind of be the face of disagreement within that party, because, while I agree with Kevin that there are, kind of four factions or, two factions within each party, I feel like I really haven't been seeing the face of moderate Republicans for the past 4 years.
Because they're putting bags over their heads because they're afraid that they're going to lose because of the Trump electricity with Republican voters. I mean, if we look at 2016, there was no enthusiasm for Hillary Clinton. It was an enthusiasm issue. What the Democrats showed us is, despite their division, they were able to come together and elect a president, right? I really genuinely question whether the Republicans will be able to mend their fences. And if you take the John McCain crowd and the Trump crowd, and how are they going to be able to hold hands to get it done in 4 years or 8 years, especially if he's meddling in, putting QAnon nominees in vital races.
Yeah, the social media part is really interesting of this, because we had Sarah Palin and the Tea Party before this. Trump wasn't the originator of trying to create a kind of a radical faction in the Republican Party, but the social media has made it, and Trump just having some kind of intuition for how to make that work really well for him has just kind of magnified the power of it, right? In a way that I think the Republican Party really has to wrestle with, right? That more than anything else, I think, is the thing that a lot of the Republican moderates are very scared about, is they don't have that skill set. They don't know how to manage that. And it's something that's kind of, Trump is, taking and running away from the rest of the party with it.
Kevin, on the Democratic side, you have said that Washington is blue, but not that progressive. What do you mean?
Well, so, let's just look at King County, right? Seattle is very blue and largely progressive. Although when you see in issues like, defunding the police department, there's still, a diversity of views on that. But, even look at just sort of the East Side cities, right? You look at, Bellevue and Kirkland and Renton and, Woodinville. You look at, Pierce County went blue, Snohomish County went blue in this last election, but they don't hold nearly as strong progressive views as Seattle does. So even just staying west of the Cascades, right, where really the concentration of people are and the concentration of Democrats are, there's a lot more moderate Democrats in this area, in this region, once you get outside of, the city of Seattle itself.
So here we are with still saying, the media are saying President-elect Joe Biden, which is kind of an old convention. He's technically not elected. The election is not over. And we were talking before we got underway here, Jasmyne, even in Washington State, we have Lauren Culp, he hasn't conceded to Jay Inslee, and technically Washington counties have 10 more days to process ballots. Why does it matter whether a candidate concedes early? Is that just going to be an old bygone relic? Everyone's going to say, well, let's wait until it's official.
Right. Yeah. I think that there's, in this election, there's a lot of reasons for that. Right. I think that Trump and Culp and, a couple of other Republicans around the country are kind of using this moment to, sow just distrust in our electoral system, right? It's not necessarily about, we need to make sure every vote is counted. It's more about, making people really question the nature of our electoral system, right? And especially when it doesn't favor, their own results, right? It doesn't favor Trump, it doesn't favor Culp. And so I think that conceding, the night of, or, from a point of reality where, on election night or the couple of days after, it was clear that Trump didn't really have a path to victory, right? And so him conceding would be a recognition of the fact, that he lost, it would reflect, humility and decency and kind of a commitment to a peaceful transfer of power. But, I don't think that the Trump administration has ever really been decent or, humble in anything that they're doing. And, never really conformed to any norm of the presidential office. So I really think that going forward, we could kind of see our relationship to the political concession changing a lot.
It's going to be up to the more responsible flank of the Republican Party at some point, in the days ahead to start really embracing this thing. And I mean, they're obviously terrified of this guy, and now he's got a grip of money and he can use it very vengefully, and we know he probably will. So that's why I think you're not seeing a greater number of Republicans come out and just say, come on, man, right? Because this is all very obvious. And I don't know that this is going to really set the tone for future elections. I don't think that outside of whoever exists in Trump land as their designee or surrogate in the years to come is going to find it politically expedient to do some of the stuff that Trump has done. And I don't think that this is going to become a trend. I just think that also maybe it'll help with the electorate a little bit. I think so often we're conditioned to get election results the night of, and whenever you have a close race, that doesn't happen. I remember, the Senate race for the U.S. Senate in Colorado in 2010 that took a couple of days to count, and it seemed weird, but the truth of the matter is that there are going to be close elections in the future, and hopefully the electorate will learn that basically, hey, election night is just when the deadline is to return your ballots. We're not going to always have an answer by then. And it's, I don't think everything about this presidency has been unorthodox. The response to this loss has been unorthodox, and I don't think it's going to set the tone for the way business is done in the future.
Kevin, I was out of state when the Washington gubernatorial race between Dino Rossi and Christine Gregoire, I think that was 2008, and it was so close. Were you following politics at that time?
Yeah, not really, but obviously, I was watching election night coverage and the days to come, and yeah, that did drag out for a couple of weeks. But the state largely was patient about it. I wish kind of in the run up to this election, we had done a better job of advertising Washington State as really the model for the rest of the country. In the couple of weeks leading up to it, there were a lot of kind of national journalists talking about the fact that, hey, trying to sort of reset expectations that we're not going to get an answer. Like, the election night is not going to be a reality show event, right? That we're not going to get answers that night. We're going to have to be patient. And, in the face of Trump and, and others, demanding that we have an answer that night, it didn't entirely take. But, I think we as a state continue to be a really great example of how to do it right.
Yeah, and I think the national clamoring for results is definitely a reflection of feeling like this election is really consequential, even more so than 2016, right? We were really blindsided by Trump's win, but I think, for people like me who felt like anxiously, checking the New York Times live blog, for the 5 days or however long, it felt like, a lot of things were riding on this election. So I think that's part of the desire for results immediately.
On the topic of whether Governor Inslee will take a job in the Biden White House, there's, of course, this speculation. This week, the New York Times said Inslee is a top contender for energy secretary. They mentioned Interior, EPA, climate czar. My question is, how much do you think it would matter in Washington state politics? Is it, a 3-term governor or reelected again? That's a big change, but is it just, there's plenty of popular, competent, experienced Democrats ready to go and we move on? Or would that seem like an earthquake in Washington politics? Any opinions on that?
I can see a few reasons why it shouldn't happen. One, first and foremost, being Inslee's promise to the voters in this election that he wasn't going to walk. And I'll tell you another, I've covered the nominations of the last 2 energy secretaries. It was my beat in Washington. I covered nuclear weapons. Jay Inslee doesn't fit the profile. It's usually someone from a nuclear weapon production state. Although it would send a very strong message if they found someone from a state like Washington, where nuclear cleanup, at Hanford is a very big deal. And if it was meant to signal our priority is to clean up the mess that's been left behind, the toxic legacy of the nuclear weapons program, well then, yeah, maybe Inslee's the guy. But I would look to Tennessee, New Mexico, California, or Texas, which are the states where nuclear weapons are produced, and they have a number of progressive people who served in the Senate right alongside Biden. I mean, I think it's blind to not expect that like a Tom Udall from New Mexico might get that nomination. It's generally somebody who comes from the nuclear weapons world. I could see Inslee sliding a lot more easily into the EPA role, but when you ask the people of a state to elect you for a third term behind the promise of not leaving, you're leaving that for your successor to answer for. The Democrats in this state that want to run subsequently, you don't want to have to live down Jay Inslee's lie to do that.
And totally. I also think, sorry, go ahead, Jasmyne.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, also, in addition to what Patrick said, leaving during the middle of, COVID response, I think would be really irresponsible for him. Our state isn't doing as terribly as a lot of the states in the Midwest, but I think that him not really getting a handle on the virus and bringing down the curve and leaving to go be a part of the Biden administration, I think it wouldn't really curry him a lot of favor with Washingtonians and maybe Americans more broadly too.
I totally agree with Jasmyne on that. And I think, when we look back over last year, Inslee, I'm sure his approval ratings went up, to some extent in the spring, just simply because he decided he was going to be a public voice for what we needed to do. I mean, we heard from him, 2-3 times a week. He was doing the kinds of things that he just did with his wife, right? Where, he'd have the dad talk with the state, right? He took a personal role in setting the tone for how we need to respond to this. And he's not done. I mean, that job is not done yet, right? We are not out of this. Mm-hmm. And for him to walk away in the middle of that, and, I like Denny Heck, but I can't imagine him doing that the way that Jay Inslee has done it for the last 10 months.
Well, you could say that about it, but by that measure, no governor should go to a Biden administration. Or you could say, a county leader working with their public health department. I mean, that freezes a lot of people.
Well, but I think there are a lot of governors who really were not successful at doing that. Whereas overall, Inslee was pretty darn successful, right? There wasn't the wild kind of pushback on restrictions that a lot of other states have seen. And we largely kept it under control in the spring and the summer. We had a little peak, in June and July. And now, now there's a big peak that everybody expected as we went into the winter, and we're seeing it too. Our per capita rates are still well below most of the other states in the nation. So, compared to everybody else, we're still doing pretty good, right? We have a problem. We need to get on top of it really fast, but it's not the crisis that it is in a whole bunch of other states right now, right? And I think Inslee deserves at least some measure of credit for that, because he got out and really took a leadership role in that.
One more reason I think he's not in line for a cabinet nomination is that, those are the perks that go to governors who deliver states that are in doubt. Washington was never in doubt. What could Jay Inslee give a Democratic president that wasn't already going to be delivered in electoral votes? I mean, they turn to donors, they turn to people who do them favors. And I just don't see Jay Inslee doing that many favors for Biden, and that would warrant a cabinet post. I'm going to float this. I'm terrible at punditry, but what do you think of this for a Democratic strategy? Biden puts Vice President Harris in charge of the COVID response, so she is constantly in the public eye with Anthony Fauci. We're far more than we usually get to know a vice president. And then when the vaccine finally arrives, the president, Biden, gives her all the credit. She runs for president in 4 years as the person who crushed the pandemic. If Trump is the nominee, his candidacy just reminds everyone how horrible COVID was under him. Harris wins. If Trump is not the nominee, his fans don't vote because he's their guy. Harris wins. Did I just entirely make up all of that out of just nonsense? I can go a bridge further. What if he steps down? What if Biden backs out, like in maybe his third year? He's already talking about being a one-termer. What if he hands her the presidency? We've seen it throughout state legislatures and in Congress when there's a party that has a favored candidate, that you make them the incumbent. You give them the incumbent advantage before they're the incumbent. I mean, I could literally see everything that you have laid out and that happening, if the Democrats think that it's going to give them a better chance in 2024.
Yeah, I mean,
please go ahead.
I was going to say, like, I think that we'll definitely see Biden or Harris be way more in the public eye, just because of, Biden's history with Obama. Like, they worked very closely. And I think, with Biden's kind of self-awareness that he's going to be a one-termer, I definitely wouldn't put it past him to really put Harris out in front. Maybe not necessarily with the COVID response, but just keeping her in, America's sort of eye.
Yeah, I think the risk with putting her in charge of the COVID response is that she has been a political flashpoint, and I do think he does need to. Biden needs to depoliticize the COVID response. Putting Harris in charge of it might do just the opposite, right? I think she'd be fantastic at it. I think she's incredibly, competent and would do a great job speaking to what needs to be done. But there is a risk that it would politicize.
How is she flashpoint?
What was that?
How is she?
I mean, you look at just over the course of the campaign, particularly, the last few months, there were a lot of, the Trump campaign messages and other candidates around the nation that weren't so much running against Biden as they were running against Harris, right? And were making arguments that, once they got elected, Biden would fully adopt Harris's political agenda because she ran on an agenda, a platform that was much farther left than Biden through the primaries, right? And that was never fully resolved as to how the two of them on a single ticket what happens to Harris's agenda and her platform. Is that get completely overrun by Biden's platform, or does some of it get in there in some form?
I think if you're going to hand Harris, a major key issue to sort of spearhead, it's got to be police reform, because she's deficient in that area to Democratic voters. She's a prosecutor. She did some things that they don't like, that the crowd out there that really is going to be potentially determining the future of the Democratic Party. It's a real rift between her and them. Here's a chance to rehab that and to put a person of color in charge of this debate. I mean, I think that that's a real opportunity that seems much more likely than giving her the COVID response.
I totally agree. I think I also, after all this misinformation from the Trump administration and having haunted sentient portrait, Mike Pence, running the show, I would love to see a doctor, or just someone in scrubs, just coming and telling me what I need to know to do about COVID. So those are kind of my thoughts on that.
And finally, the big deal still to come and how much Biden-Harris can get done is the Georgia Senate runoff, which, Jasmyne, you've been following a bit.
Yeah, the Senate runoff in Georgia, I think, is one of the most exciting things about the 2020 election. It just was announced today that Biden officially won. I think they're going to be doing a hand recount, but I think a lot of things have changed since the last election for Georgia. One person that is really being pointed to as changing that is Stacey Abrams, who ran for governor in Georgia in 2018 and lost because of voter suppression. And so she kind of sat with that for a few days and then immediately turned around and created an organization that helps fight against voter suppression. And she and other Black activists helped register 800,000 Georgians to vote, which is an incredible, unbelievable number. And I think that, coupled with, Georgia's really becoming a majority minority state, right? White people are 51% of Georgia's population. Black people are 36%. So you're seeing a lot more of the liberal views that people of color, generally tend to hold. And I think that, coupled with a lot of kind of bureaucratic changes. So I think in Georgia now, when you get a driver's license, you're automatically registered to vote, which I think every state should be doing. And there was also a couple of laws about exact match that helped, kind of people weren't allowed to register to vote. And so they changed a lot of those policies. And so I think now with a sort of more energized, younger, more people of color base in Georgia, things that are sort of seem like a foregone conclusion, aren't necessarily so, right? As I don't, a Democratic senator hasn't won a runoff in Georgia since 1992. And so that's sort of daunting to look at. But I think that in 2020 and 2021 in the runoff, I think both the Democratic senators, Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, have really good chances of winning the Senate, both the Senate races there, and potentially flipping the Senate to go blue.
And this is where one area where, to go back to Kevin's earlier point and marry it up with Jasmyne's excellent assessment just now, if you undermine the credibility of elections with this vital runoff, are Republicans going to feel like they're throwing their vote away to even participate in this election? The president runs that risk here. And I really think the most fascinating part of this election also is going to be, will the Senate flip? And it couldn't get more dramatic. This is kind of like, it's almost like a sports analogy, which we get too many of in this, but it's like coming down to the last second Hail Mary, really.
Right. I think that, Georgians over the next 2 months, they're going to be, under a lot of pressure from both the, Republican and Democratic sides. Like, I bet Obama's going to be coming out, Trump, all of the heavy hitters are going to be really throwing all of their money into this race, because it really determines whether or not Biden can push through his agenda with ease, or, continue to have this deadlock for, at least 2 years between the Republican-held Senate and, the blue White House. So it was really incredible to watch Georgia turn this, beautiful shade of purple last week. And I hope that it's something that they can continue to do in January.
Patrick, I wanted to ask you, before you came to the Seattle Times, you were senior national security reporter at the Center for Public Integrity. What would you say are the national security implications, if any, of Trump not cooperating with a transition to Biden?
Well, probably the most practical and evident one at this point is that he's not allowing Biden to get the intelligence briefings. I mean, there are Senate candidates who lost, who have access to these briefings that the new president isn't getting. And at a time when we're facing a global pandemic, internal strife within our own population about, it's divided over the election. There's political divisions. There are divisions about Black Lives Matter versus defunding police. I mean, it's just throwing one more wedge in that makes us a very tantalizing target for an enemy. And I don't just mean for like a large scale military attack, but the ways that they nickel and dime us on a daily basis, the cyber incursions, the co-opting people in the intelligence program. These are things that are happening every day. And our president-elect, who's going to be taking office in what could be measured in weeks now, isn't getting those updates. I think that that's dangerous.
Okay, I'm going to pull out of that attitudinal dive and get to what's making us actually smile even this week when we return on the Week in Review.
Support for KUOW comes from Seattle Bank, a locally owned and operated boutique bank dedicated to being a financial resource to the community by providing customized services to individuals and businesses. Learn more at seattlebank.com. Member FDIC, equal housing lender.
It is sunny and 53 degrees in Seattle at 12:55.
Support for KUOW comes from the Corporate Bankruptcy, Restructuring, and Finance Group at Ryan Swanson Law. For 40 years, Ryan Swanson has guided businesses through complex bankruptcies, receiverships, and other insolvency matters. Learn more about the new Subchapter 5 of the Bankruptcy Code at ryanswansonlaw.com.
And now, Week in Review continues.
Finally, what's making us smile? I start with a little clarification because last week I made a lighthearted reference to the annual War on Christmas debate when Starbucks rolls out its secular winter holiday cups. 2 listeners wrote to remind me that no, all Christians do not feel a need to have Jesus on a coffee cup. You are right. Thank you for that. My email address is bradke@kuow.org. Now, what is smiling me this week? Seattle can be gloomy and disaffected, as Kurt Cobain once symbolized, but Seattle can also be warm and fun, as Dave Grohl has represented over and over. He was the drummer for Nirvana and then the Foo Fighters, and he seems like the kind of dude who would play along if, say, a 10-year-old British girl challenged him to a drum-off. This is Mandy Bushell of Ipswich drumming on her kit to Nirvana. You can hear her hollering, and I wish you could see the elation on her face.
It's so fantastic. I tweeted it out at KUOW Radke. Grohl took her up on her drum-off challenge. They made a split-screen video of the two of them drumming to Everlong. And unlike Donald Trump or Lauren Culp, Dave Grohl conceded.
Okay, Mandy, you got me. You win round one. But I got something special for you. Something you've never heard before. Something I've never heard before. Because I'm about to write this off the top of my head for you.
So then he kicks into this song all about Mandy and how she's going to change the world with rock and roll. And she's watching in amazement at her computer with her mother just outside the frame.
Wow, he wrote a song about me. Thank you so much, Dave Grohl. Thank you so much. He wrote a song dedicated to me. It's amazing, isn't it?
Now, would this have made me teary if we were not in a pandemic? Unknowable, but it was just what I needed. What is making me smile? Oh, thank you for that.
Anybody else smiling at anything? Nostalgia, I think Patrick said.
Yeah, nostalgia in our house. You know, I have 2 elementary school age kids, and I'm introducing them to cultural icons such as Atari and classic Nintendo and Pac-Man. Not to mention, you know, Scooby-Doo, Ghostbusters, and generally getting them ready for 80s trivia night when they're older.
Kevin, you said you're streaming.
Fall TV season, right?
Yeah.
Star Trek Discovery, new season of The Crown coming out next week, Amazing Race, British Baking Show, even Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live, you know, has been, you know, Dave Chappelle last week was just amazing to watch.
Jasmine, why are you smiling?
I am smiling because I have a bunch of candles that smell really good. I feel like a kind of, you know, a bohemian person that loves to have my space, you know, smell really nice. And
Yes.
I've just bought a lot of really nice candles to kind of calm down from this election stress.
You all made me smile this week. Jasmyne Keimig from The Stranger, Kevin Schofield, SCC Insight, Patrick Malone of the Seattle Times. Thanks, everybody, for weekend reviewing with me. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you so much, Dave Grohl. Thank you.